Late in the story of Disco Elysium, the game gives you the opportunity to look at yourself and say, I don't want to be this kind of animal anymore. And a giant stick insect, hidden in the reeds, previously thought to be a myth, a legend, like Bigfoot, it stares at you. And through your own imagination, the inland empire, it speaks to you. And it tells you, I exist. And you say, I also exist. And it asks what existence is like for you. And you say, fire, burning, inside. And it says, for me, it is a series of half-lit images, a kind of darkness being intruded upon, transient, dim, intruded upon by shapes of plants and animals and internal sensations, a swarm of sounds, tiny vibrations on the inside of my forearms. They all speak of complexities totally beyond my understanding. I'm at the end of a narrow funnel, weightless, so light it only feels like something to be me. And you look at this monolithic insect and ask, what's happening to me right now? And it says, I don't know. But few of us can begin to imagine the horror of you, with all of creation reflected in your forebrain. It must be the highest of hells, a kaleidoscope of fire and writhing glass. The moral of our encounter is, I am a relatively median life form, while it's you who are total extreme madness, a volatile simian nervous system ominously new to the planet. There's an almost unanimous agreement between the birds and the plants that you are going to destroy us all. You are a violent and irrepressible miracle. The vacuum of the cosmos and the stars burning in it are afraid of you. Given enough time, you would wipe us all out and replace us with nothing, just by accident. And you stand there trying to take this all in. And then you remember, this is a murder mystery. And you ask yourself, who killed the hanged man? Disco Elysium is a role-playing game that takes place in a world that mirrors our own. It's fantastical and bleak. You load up the game and you're told to allocate some skill points for your detective. And that's pretty normal. That's how all role-playing games work. You level up certain skills that help you interact with the world. For the uninitiated, Disco Elysium is a dialogue-based game. There are definitely moments of intense action, but there's no separate mechanic for combat. All your decisions are made through dialogue. And there are plenty of games like that. Again, there's nothing new here. Except, some of these skills look strange and eerie. There are some familiar ones like perception and endurance, and there's also suggestion and logic, but what the hell is half-light? And shivers? Savoir-faire? Esprit de corps? And what is inland empire? Hunches and gut feelings, dreams in waking life. Inland empire is the unfiltered wellspring of imagination, emotion, and foreboding. At high levels, inland empire animates the inanimate. You'll have conversations with your clothing, conversations that may change the course of the investigation if you're not thrown in the loony bin first. With low inland empire, however, you'll be void of imagination and character. And then how will you shape the cosmos? How exactly is this game supposed to work? Before the game even begins, Disco Elysium presents you with a bit of a mystery. These skills don't just help you engage with the world, and they're not just weird. They talk to you. They represent different voices in your head. The more you level them up, the more they'll speak to you. They might give you good advice or bad advice. They might disagree with one another. And they'll be constantly chiming in during your conversations in the game for only you to hear and for only you to decide, which little voice in my head should I trust? You're not just building your character's skill set, you're building your character's internal monologue, the perspectives through which you're going to be internally processing the world. The gameplay loop isn't just in response to other characters and events, but your own intrusive thoughts, which you also shape by emphasizing different aspects of your personality. Your thoughts, your skills in the game, inform your actions, which affects the world, which affects you through experience points, and then informs your thoughts again, your skills. That's kind of a perfect metaphor for how we engage with the world. And because those mechanics represent your inner monologue, the game is able to explore the subject of consciousness. Every part of Disco Elysium's user interface is meant to represent the way in which your detective thinks about the world. And there are times when Disco Elysium reflects on whether the internal lives of other characters operate in the same way as yours. With skills and voices and lists and dialogue trees. And because these skills that speak to you intrusively are double-edged, they're not omniscient, they're not always right, they're more projections than anything. The game, therefore, also creates a representation of what it's like to fight yourself, to try to understand yourself, to navigate your internal world. That doesn't just make you feel seen as a human being playing this game. It also lays the groundwork for Disco Elysium's approach to understanding human existence and even politics. You know what I'm into, Kim?
Total retrograde amnesia.
What was that? Hello? So the game begins in a state of unconsciousness. Through the black void of sleep, two voices, labeled only as ancient reptilian brain and limbic system, begin to speak to you. They caution you against waking up. They tell you that the only thing that's waiting for you out there in the waking world is a big blue ball full of evil apes, just duking it out. That and the X something. But you wake up anyway. You find yourself naked, hung over after a night of apocalyptic drug use. A night so self-destructive you have forgotten who you are, what you do, where you are, everything. Total retrograde amnesia. Even the smallest, most basic concepts of reality and the world are a mystery to you. Things like money and government. This is, after all, a mystery game. So you gather your things, you have a strange encounter with a necktie and a beautiful, sad, and mysterious woman smoking on the balcony outside. She tells you, among other things, that you're a police officer and that you'll see her again later. You find yourself in the Whirling in Rags, a small hotel and cafe in Martinez, a lesser district in the great city of Revachol. A glance at the calendar reveals it is the spring of 51. When you go downstairs, you eventually meet your new partner, Lieutenant Kim Kitsuragi, and you will come to love this man. After you catch him up to speed with your amnesia and your obvious hangover, he briefs you. There's a man who has been hanging by a noose in the back of the Whirling in Rags, decomposing for 3 days straight, and it's suspected that the local dock workers' union is involved. And something feels off. What's more, the union is on strike, and a representative is in town from the corporation they're unionized against, Wild Pines. So you've got to conduct some interviews and examine the body and, oh yeah, find your missing gun and your missing badge and, if possible, learn your own name. See, there are more than a few mysteries to solve in Disco Elysium. Rest assured they all converge back into each other. Arguably, the second most urgent of these mysteries is, what's going on with your amnesia? Making a player character an amnesiac isn't a new thing in video games. It's a trope for a reason. It's weird to play a character going around asking basic questions about lore and the world they live in when they have supposedly lived in that world their whole life. That's how most RPGs work. So a lot of them give you amnesia to make it a bit more believable. But in Disco Elysium, the reason for the detective's amnesia isn't just a plot-driven one, it's a character-driven one. Your character is a substance abuser and fundamentally depressed. Your amnesia isn't caused by an external factor so much as it's caused by your character's motivations. Sure, you lost your memory because you drank too much, but why did you do that? It's not what happened to me, it's why did I do this to myself? That question adds a layer of immersion and complexity to an old trope, because now it's a way for the game to artistically explore depression, self-sabotage, substance abuse, and loss. If you want to plunge your detective further into ruin, the game will let you, and unflinchingly show you a portrait of a broken, delusional addict, alienating everyone around him in order to punish himself. If you want to clean up and get sober, the game will let you do that too, but it won't give you false optimism. You'll have to fight the pain, boredom, and temptation ceaselessly. And you'll have to give up the stat boosts that drugs and alcohol helpfully provide in the game. The game asks, how do these different paths affect a person or others around you? Why do we romanticize our pain? And how do we strike a balance between confronting our own past and indulging in toxic nostalgia? That last one has political implications that Disco Elysium thoroughly explores, but we'll talk about that later. Here's another question. Is your character's amnesia actually a function of your substance abuse, which the game acknowledges would be medically extraordinary? Or is it an elaborate coping mechanism that your character is trying to convince himself is beyond his control? Is he gaslighting everyone, including himself? The game lets you look for these answers and find them, and even create some definitively for yourself. But it also just lets you leave it all behind. You can let your past and even your own name stay a mystery. But the game will leave you wondering if that's the healthiest choice or not. And you'll have to actively ignore the haunting smell of apricots everywhere you go.
I have learned that the brain is vulnerable to compromises in its oxygen supply.
Seriously, who's doing that? So strangely enough, this game is absolutely hilarious. No, seriously, this will be one of the absolute funniest games you'll ever play. And yet, the humor of this game doesn't undercut its seriousness. It enhances it. The comedy in Disco Elysium is biting and sharp, and it always circles back to its core themes, which is why when people praise this game, they talk about the profound impact it had on them rather than the hilarious jokes. But there are so many hilarious jokes, ranging from cynical and dry to outright silly. Right at the start of the game, you can grab your tie from the ceiling fan above you.
You swoop up and catch the tie. Snap. It's released from the blade. Warning, warning. The necktie is no longer contained.
Oh yeah, baby! Fuck this place up!
And, of course, the detective's amnesia serves as a tool for you to act out in hilariously inappropriate and delusional ways. But it all functions to make the dramatic and existential moments in the game all the more affecting. For instance, you can collect clothes found in containers around the world and wear them for stat benefits, and doing so will inevitably result in a ridiculously dressed law official. Or you can just walk around with no pants on. Either way, the other characters will notice and comment. And despite the absurdity of a cop dressed in a silk robe, a fedora, sweatpants, and snakeskin boots, it ultimately underscores the tragic mental state of your character. It's funny and it's sad, but it's funny. Another example comes early on when your detective learns that he owes the manager of the Whirling in Rags money. You can opt to immediately run away, leap into the air, do a 180, flip the manager double birds, and then crash right into an older woman in a wheelchair behind you. And if you don't have enough health, this could literally kill your character, get you a game over screen. It's absolutely hilarious, but it's also incredibly pathetic, and the game lets you know it. It's the behavior of a man who has hit absolute rock bottom, and it's deeply sad. You're laughing, but you also kind of feel shame on behalf of your detective. This is a depressed alcoholic, but the game refuses to make light of that. It uses humor to do the opposite. Disco Elysium wants this funny man to make you sad with his funniness. So add another thing to the list of why this game is so fucking brilliant. Even its comedy is woven into character development and narrative, and used as a way to explore its themes rather than just frame them. It's not let's talk about existentialism in a funny way. It's what's the connection between the humorousness of your character and their psyche, and their relationship to existence. And what does that say about existence itself?
One thing that I know about me is that I am an absolutely raging...
Okay, look, can I not have more than one voice going on in my head at the same time? I worked really hard in this video. It's important to me.
Okay, very good job, Chris. Good
Wow.
job.
Wow,
So
that's
proud
great.
of you
No,
to make a
no,
little
that's
video.
Cool. That's fine. Be
Everybody cheer.
sarcastic.
Woo, good
It's
job,
cool.
Chris.
Yeah,
Woo,
really,
yay.
real mature.
Chris
real
made a
mature.
little video.
Yeah. Look, why don't you just do the rest of the lines? Okay, it's yours. Take it. Disco Elysium is a very political game. Elysium is the name of the world in which the characters of the game inhabit. And as I've mentioned before, it's a strange, distorted version of our own. In this world, the communist revolution failed. It was built upon the ideas of Mazovian socioeconomics, named after Krasmazov, so technically not Karl Marx. The revolution, which occurred all over the world of Elysium, was put down violently by the Coalition, the game's stand-in for the United Nations. As the game puts it,
generally speaking, 40 million people got shot in the head during the World Revolution. But the communists, they all got shot in the head. Oh, and the anarchists too. They shot them well. So well, one forgets they even existed.
The decisive battle that felled the revolution was fought in the city of Revachol, where the game takes place. There was no real effort to rebuild. As such, you and the people of Revachol live in the shadow of defeat among rubble, bullet holes, and crumbling infrastructure. A constant reminder of loss, failure, and shattered dreams. Poverty is significant and everywhere. People are left desperate and cold. The working class is resigned to their fate. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer, and capitalist realism has thoroughly set in, which sounds familiar. It's within this political intrigue that our murder takes place. Is there a political motivation to the killing? How does a company rep and a union boss figure into all of this? And true to most RPGs, Disco Elysium allows you to pick your own political alignment, your faction, so to speak. Disco Elysium offers you the chance to roleplay a detective who believes in fascism, or moralism, which is the game's centrist faction, or ultraliberalism, which is the game's capitalist faction, or communism. And many characters that you'll meet will fall into one of these factions or the other, but they're rarely a cut and dried this or that. They all have complicated feelings about the revolution, about capital, about the centrist status quo. But crucially, Disco Elysium makes sure this isn't the case for you. You see, the game intentionally deceives you, the player, and this is used to shock you into a sort of gestalt-like reflection on your own beliefs. You see, there's one aspect of your detective's character that you can't alter through skill points or dialogue choices. No matter how you play him, your detective will always be an extremist, ideologically speaking. Always. Disco Elysium eliminates your ability as a player to express political nuance, at least through dialogue. Your detective will still be a nuanced character, but it's a nuance that your necessary extremism will betray. Because the game makes it clear that your detective's all-or-nothing, black-and-white, zealous approach to everything is a coping mechanism. It's how your detective deals with pain. You did, after all, drink your memory away. It's a pretty extreme thing to do. But even though you're stuck with this character trait, that's not necessarily so clear at the beginning of the game. Because it's pretty unusual in role-playing games like this for the main character to be uncontrollable in this particular way. This is a brilliant trick on Disco Elysium's part, because it's a design element that's built to trigger you, the player, and it winds up being a very effective way to examine the psychological underpinnings of political beliefs, as well as the inherent virtue of the beliefs themselves. It's trying to push your buttons, all irony intended. A lot of players will want to express their own personal opinions through their detective, so players are lured in through dialogue options available in the early game that express their liberalism, their leftism, their centrism, or their conservatism. Then, after a while, the game insists that what your detective actually believes is the most extreme version of those things. Things that will make your fellow game characters raise an eyebrow, even if they're technically aligned with your politics. Which makes the player feel attacked. Control is wrested away from us in a way that we're not used to as players. There's some especially delightful streams of this game by more conservative streamers who get hilariously pressed when the game tells them that their conservative dialogue choices have actually been fascist ones all along. Go around saying enough things like, I believe in Revacholian nationhood, and men should be men, and your literal stomach will contact you to let you know you're a big old fascist.
It's clear you like the hard stuff, Brota. Lower intestine. The term is metabolic and circulatory system. Fascism, Brota. Many things, but it's mostly about trusting your gut. Who does your gut tell you is the source of Revachol's problems? Yes, them, but also women, men of war. You don't like them. They're insane. Their idiocy needs to be scrubbed off this world with rubbing alcohol. Woo men need to go back to the fucking kitchen. That's what fascism boils down to. The rest is also important. But the main thing is that woo men need to know their place. Okay, yes, let's call it that. Good thinking.
Until I played Disco Elysium, I never really thought about fascism in those terms, but it makes perfect sense to me. An obsession with eugenics is in part an obsession with women and controlling their bodies. It's not an accident that we stripped away abortion rights in my country, and it's not an accident that that disproportionately affects women of color. And it's definitely not an accident that the American fascist is completely and utterly obsessed with trans women particularly. They hate women. They hate all women. They want to control them as much as possible. So when confronted with all of this, what happens if the player tries to insist that they're not fascist, just traditional?
Of course you are, Bruta. Of course.
You cannot push back against your detective adopting the most extreme version of his politics. This kind of trolling is applied to all the political alignments you can choose. There is no balanced political perspective. It's because of this that so many players and critics initially confused Disco Elysium's approach with equally criticizing all politics. But that's not what's happening. Disco Elysium isn't just interested in making the player reflect on the most extreme versions of their politics. It's interested in stress testing different real-world political ideologies through your character's unassailable maximalism. It's asking, what can we learn about politics if we look at them through the eyes of a man who is pathologically committed to going full throttle no matter what he chooses? Pathologically committed because the less nuanced the take is, the simpler it is. And when you make the world simple, it helps you cope with pain. You feel the detective's desperation in his political beliefs. You feel his desire for everything to be easily understandable, a trait very befitting of a detective. He's someone who wants a nice, neat solution. The game is exploring what our beliefs mean to us personally. I honestly think that's an underexplored subject, just generally speaking. We don't often psychologically examine our politics. I think in part because we're afraid that if we connect our politics back to our psychological makeup, it'll invalidate them in some way, by highlighting how our feelings play into it all. Disco Elysium is specifically asking what different political views have to offer us personally, as human beings struggling with the furies in the mirror. But as I intimated before, it's also a way for the game to deliver its own criticisms of each political approach. The creators of the game themselves are out and proud leftists, but as we all know, that doesn't preclude them from having very choice words for the left. If you follow along a leftist path, the game will of course force you to endorse a bloody, authoritarian, completely uncritical version of Stalin-esque communism. Such is the psyche of your detective. And you will be given a thought to internalize. Thoughts are something that you can actually collect in Disco Elysium, like you would any other item in a game. If you choose to internalize a thought, you're treated to a change in your stats or the gameplay itself. Thoughts have titles and descriptions, only all of which is revealed after you internalize it. The thought related to communism perfectly encapsulates the game's critique of the left.
0.000% of communism has been built. Evil child-murdering billionaires still rule the world with a shit-eating grin. All he has managed to do is make himself sad. He is starting to suspect Krasmezov fucked him over, personally, with his socio-economic theory. It has, however, made him into a very smart boy with something like a university degree in truth. Instead of building communism, he now builds a precise model of this grotesque, duplicitous world.
If you've been following my channel, that last line might sound familiar to you. Anti-capitalist content that's more concerned with building a precise model of the world we live in, really encouraging wealth of content creators who do more than build a precise model of the world that we live in. Yeah, this game has definitely had a profound effect on me. But as I said, the creators themselves are leftist, and if your detective follows along a communist path, Disco Elysium will show you a portrait of a man who deeply wants the world to be a better, more empathetic place. It will show you a man who refuses to accept that the world has reached the end of history, that it should remain broken and unfinished. It will show you a detective who wants to take away everyone's pain, precisely because he feels so much of it himself. And is that so selfish? At the very least, it's a much different picture than if you go down the fascism route. If you follow the fascist path, your detective will harm and alienate everyone around him. He will be unironically and unabashedly sexist, racist, and homophobic. He will continually traumatize and harm his new partner, a queer man of color, and thereby jeopardize the investigation and even his own life. This is why it's wrong to view Disco Elysium as a game that attacks all political ideologies as some sort of equal opportunity offender, because it comes to dramatically different conclusions about the value of these ideas and what they mean about the people who espouse them. And of course, centrism and libertarianism get a similar treatment. In particular, I'm fond of what Disco Elysium has to say about a centrist worldview.
The kingdom of conscience will be exactly as it is now. Moralists don't really have beliefs. Sometimes they stumble on one, like on a child's toy left on the carpet. The toy must be put away immediately, and the child reprimanded. Centrism isn't change, not even incremental change. It is control over yourself and the world. Exercise it. Look up at the sky, at the dark shapes of the coalition airships hanging there. Ask yourself, is there something sinister in moralism? And then answer, no. God is in his heaven. Everything is normal on earth.
I mean, just chef's kiss. But what if you avoid all these dialogue options because they're just too extreme for your tastes? Well, the game notices. And after a while, your subconscious will contact you to tell you that you have unlocked a new capo type. Boring cop. A cop devoid of personality and opinion. Someone who takes his apolitical stance to the extreme.
You've done it, Harry. Whatever else you are, you're also boring now. It was not easy. You spent most of your life trying to funk up every nook and cranny of your personality. When someone says something political, the first 3 thoughts in your head are a ludicrous hodgepodge of communism, fascism, and stock tips. When they ask you why you did something, it's superstardom, apocalypse, or the mea culpas of the flagellant cop monk. It's not easy reaching for the 4th option, the normal one. But you have, and now you're not just crazy, you're also boring.
The game looks at you square in the face and tells you that you've been completely and totally uninteresting. It functionally calls you empty. But I think there's also something profound about this joke. The game is telling you there is no escaping ideology. A non-choice is still a choice. A non-stance is still a stance. And it too has its own psychological underpinnings. Not having an opinion doesn't just remove you from the situation, it removes yourself from developing character, both in the game and in real life. Whatever you choose for your detective, Disco Elysium will weave it into his psyche, his relationships, the lore of the world, and the investigation itself. Because at the end of the day, no matter what political ideology you explore in the game, you'll still have to answer the most burning, important question. Who killed the hanged man?
The hauntology of
I
failure.
hope you're happy. Failure is an enormous theme that runs throughout Disco Elysium, and it's embedded in the game's mechanics. In order to perform crucial actions like jumping a ledge, asserting your authority to a suspect, or gleaning some crucial insight from a wall, you'll have to roll some dice. Each action is associated with a particular skill, and the higher your skill level, the higher your chance to succeed. But there's always a chance of rolling snake eyes and failing automatically. Conversely, your chances could be terrible, but if you roll 2 6s, you'll succeed the skill check. But Disco Elysium has a very important narrative approach with this mechanic. If you ever fail at an action, there will almost always be a way around it. Sometimes it's even preferable to fail, but of course you won't know until you do. This works on a basic level for you, the player. The game encourages you not to worry if you fail a check. Failure is the point. Failure is what makes the game fun. Sure, some failures might prove fatal. You do, after all, have different bars for health and morale, and you don't want them to run out. But the vast majority of the time, failing a check means taking a few extra steps to complete your goal. And those extra steps might open up new experiences for you in the game and new pathways to explore. This isn't an entirely unique game mechanic. It's basically how all tabletop RPGs like Dungeons & Dragons work. But what's unique about Disco Elysium is that it folds this mechanic into the narrative. Almost every character, including your detective, is haunted by failure. Failures of governments and revolutions, failures of capitalism and communism, failures in love, failures in the line of duty. And all of this failure is intimately connected to the past. For instance, Joyce Messier, the representative for Wild Pines and a key figure in the investigation, is haunted by her complicitness in capital and the destruction of Revachol. She embodies a duality with her warm demeanor and wistful charm and deep romanticism, alongside cruel privilege.
I am the vilest of the vile, a traitor, a devourer of nations and infants. I am an ultra. Yes. I am the nether creature of the Forbidden Swamp. I pushed the king under a shit wagon and betrayed the revolution. My kind surrendered the nation to financial colonists. I can see you thought we'd gone extinct. After all, no sane person identifies as an ultra-liberal anymore. Not in broad daylight. You're a man of the left, no? Tell me, now that I've uncoiled myself, are you repulsed?
In her green eyes, you see a mixture of truth and self-satire. Decades of guilt and pride.
Honestly, I may have even preferred it, had the communards won. Who knows? They might really have built something better. But they didn't, because they lost.
No matter how your detective treats Joyce, she will always extend to you a kind and nostalgic camaraderie as a fellow person who came of age in the disco era.
No doubt. But we share the same time and position on the planet's crust. That counts for more than you think.
She carries a dreamy, bittersweet understanding of the past, and it's incredibly inviting. You can't help but like her. But she's at best complicit in horrific systemic cruelty, and perhaps not so indirectly as she'd have you believe. She's presented as someone who was once earnestly invested in the belief that capitalism would be the best thing for society and would ultimately uplift everyone toward prosperity. Now she grapples with that failure while continuing her complicitness in it, comfortable in how her privilege affords her the ability to be wistful as opposed to starving. Similarly, your partner, Kim Kitsuragi, is haunted by the failures of moralism, the game's centrist philosophy. And various other characters carry trauma from their past, the failures of their parents, of their great loves, of the communist revolution. And while failure is a key fixture of the past, it is also a key fixture of the future. That's what hauntology is. It's the recurrence or persistence of elements of the past echoing throughout the present, stretching into the horizon, which makes the dice mechanic a perfect way to underscore this theme and to construct a microcosm of life. Your successes and failures are always a mixture of skill and luck, and failure is guaranteed. And sometimes it will lead to the end of the road, but most often, it simply opens up a new opportunity, one that still provides a way forward, if you can stomach the blow to your sense of hope and loss. In Disco Elysium, failure is a harsh reality, and it's meant to be embraced. Hello? Are you still there? During your time as the detective, you can learn about the existence of a dark gray corona surrounding the world. It's called the Pale, and it covers the majority of the world's surface. There are gray flares and prominences, even arcs across entire continents. If the world of Elysium was a sphere, it certainly looks like it fractured a long time ago. Imagine vast swathes of land disrupted by nothingness. The character you learn this from says to you, I don't have the power to convey to you the effect and geometry of the images that depict our world from below low orbit. It's like the crowning of the world. Very disco. You'd love it. The Pale is essentially Disco Elysium's version of climate change. And just like in the real world, it too is also man-made. I won't give away the rest of the details or how to find them, but they're there if you want to go looking. You can even play the entire game without learning about the Pale at all, but it's most likely that you will. Like our own world, all of Elysium is operating with this dreadful understanding that permeates every aspect of human existence, from relationships to politics to murder investigations. The understanding that whatever way the world is headed, it's a terminal one. Disco Elysium is keenly aware that we're asking ourselves, how do we deal with the horror? How do we cope with the failures of the past? Is there a future? Is there a point? In the game, it's possible to develop a theory on how to stop the spread of the Pale. But it's only a theory, and you're not some hero. You're just an incredible fuck-up trying to solve a murder by the skin of his teeth. Still, it gives you a hope for a chance, and the whole game has been about dice rolls. Disco Elysium is very much about hope. but it's mired in despair and nihilism. And that's because it's not interested in toxic positivity. But it firmly reinforces time and again that if moving forward is rejected, we lose something fundamental to our spirit, as well as our only chance at something better, however slim. Actually, no, we don't lose it. It's stolen from us. And for the entirety of your playthrough, the game will ask, hasn't this world stolen enough? Through trauma and blood and false love and surplus value? Aren't we going to at least try to take it back? And we don't need to know exactly how, because before we can figure that out, we need to pull ourselves back from resignation, the abyss. It's not the other way around. Nothing can become clear if you're resigned. Disco Elysium is a game that can hurt, but it invites you to understand something. Whether it's politics or existential threats or systemic oppression or your own traumatic experiences and your heartbreak, the first and most radical act is to say, fuck you, I'm still here. What else you got? You don't get to take away everything. The way we express ourselves, or how we think, or how we feel, or our names, our inherent animation, and most importantly, our will. I'll exist spitefully if I have to. And if you do that, you'll find the very real possibility, not promise, but possibility, that we're not done yet. In the game, one of the most important quotes comes from internalizing the thought called the precarious world.
How not to lose. It is impossible not to. The world is balanced on the edge of a knife. It's a game of frayed nerves. You're pushed on by numbers and punitive measures, pain, rejection, and unpaid bills. You can either play or you can crawl under a boat and waste away, turn into salt or a flock of seagulls. Your enemies would love that. Or you can fight. The only way to load the dice is to keep on fighting.
So that's Disco Elysium. Whew. I really hope that you play the game. And if not, that you at least got something out of this. And if you made it this far, before you click away, just ask yourself one last thing. Who killed the Hanged Man?